The world saw Nick Reiner as a child of ultimate sanctuary, the son of a cinematic titan raised in the golden glow of Brentwood. The common myth was that Nick was a Hollywood success story in the making, a writer who had conquered his demons through the 2016 film Being Charlie. But the hidden reality was a 15-year terminal descent that wealth could not stall. Behind the red carpet smiles was a man caught in a systemic collapse of addiction and untreated schizophrenia, a ghost within his own dynasty. The tragedy isn't just that a legend was lost, it's that Nick Reiner had been slipping away for over a decade before the first drop of blood was shed. To understand how the heart and soul of a family became its destruction, we must look into the shadows of the Reiner legacy. In the cold light of a forensic investigation, the most dangerous weapon isn't always a blade. Sometimes it's a chemical imbalance. According to high-level reports from TMZ and legal filings surfaced by the Law and Crime Network, Nick Reiner had recently transitioned from being a troubled youth to a man living within a shattered reality. Just weeks before the Brentwood massacre, Nick had been officially diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition characterized not just by hallucinations, but by a fundamental detachment from the shared human experience. The tragedy lies in the timing. Sources indicate that Nick's medication regimen was in a state of flux, a delicate recalibration of antipsychotics that may have left his mind in a no man's land between sedation and psychosis. Reports suggest that 3 to 4 weeks prior to the incident, doctors switched his medications, a transition period that often triggers catastrophic instability. In the world of criminal law, this is known as the mens rea anomaly. If the mind is an architecture, Nick's was a structure where the load-bearing walls of logic had collapsed, replaced by the flickering ghosts of paranoid delusions. Rob Reiner himself was reportedly aware of the deepening shadows. In a haunting admission revealed post-mortem, the director allegedly told associates at a memorial service just days before his death that he was petrified of his own son. He reportedly said, "I think my own son can hurt me." This wasn't a sudden snap, but a systemic failure. The paradox is haunting. How does a family with limitless resources, with a father who publicly advocated for mental health awareness, find themselves unable to stop the internal rot of a neurological breakdown? The diagnosis provides a label, but it offers no comfort. It suggests that while the hands that held the knife belonged to Nick, the will behind them may have been entirely absent, replaced by a storm of neurotransmitters firing in a void of madness. The defense, led by the formidable Alan Jackson, is already carving out a narrative of diminished capacity, arguing that the chemical storm in Nick's brain had effectively evicted his conscious self. Yet this mental fracture didn't happen in a vacuum. To understand the volatility of that December night, we have to look back at a history of self-destruction that began long before the schizophrenia took hold, a 15-year descent into a different kind of darkness. Before the psychosis took hold, there was the siege. To understand the wreckage of the Brentwood crime scene, one must first map the 15-year trajectory of Nick Reiner's self-immolation. In the high-stakes ecosystem of Hollywood royalty, wealth is often viewed as a protective layer, an invisible armor of specialists, elite clinics, and discreet interventions. But for Nick, the Reiner fortune served as a catalyst for a more profound isolation. By the age of 15, while his peers were navigating the curated halls of prep schools, Nick was already being swallowed by the predatory machinery of opioid and stimulant dependency. His life became a revolving door of institutionalized failure, over 20 high-end rehabilitation stints that promised a reset but only facilitated a deeper descent. This wasn't merely a struggle with substances, it was a systemic degradation of the self. There is a haunting paradox in the fact that the son of one of the most powerful directors in history experienced periods of genuine homelessness, drifting through the gray fringes of Los Angeles, while his family's name was etched in the sidewalk stars just miles away. This wasn't a lack of resources, it was the total exhaustion of them. Chronic drug abuse, particularly the long-term use of methamphetamines, doesn't just alter mood, it rewires the brain's architecture, thinning the prefrontal cortex and eroding the capacity for impulse control. By the time the schizophrenia diagnosis arrived in 2025, Nick's neurological landscape was already a scorched earth, primed for a catastrophic break. The addiction had stripped away the social and familial inhibitions that keep the human animal in check. When investigators looked into the history of the Brentwood estate, they didn't just find a tragic family, they found a 15-year history of waiting for the other shoe to drop. The drugs had turned Nick into a ghost within his own home, a volatile, unpredictable specter that haunted the Reiner legacy long before the first drop of blood was shed. But this internal rot eventually bled into the public sphere, manifesting in a chilling omen at a nondescript gas station just days before the end. If the descent into psychosis is a slow-motion car crash, the days leading up to the Brentwood murders were the screeching tires that everyone heard but no one could stop. Days before the massacre, a chilling behavioral glitch occurred at a nondescript gas station in West Los Angeles, a moment captured on CCTV and corroborated by the accounts of employees who felt the hair on their necks rise. In the dry, clinical language of the investigation, this is a pre-incident anomaly, but to those present, it was a manifestation of a man who was already a ghost. Employees reported that Nick Reiner appeared drained, his eyes hollowed out as if he were staring through the walls of the convenience store at something miles away. He moved with a mechanical, abnormal gait, spending an inordinate amount of time standing motionless in the aisles, a behavior that would later be described by forensic psychologists as prodromal posturing. He wasn't just a customer, he was a living paradox, a man from one of the most visible families in the world, appearing entirely invisible to himself. The staff noted he looked off, tweaked out, and beyond exhausted, the physical toll of a mind that had likely ceased to sleep as the medication transition and the schizophrenia merged into a singular waking nightmare. This wasn't the frantic energy of a drug bender, it was the heavy, stagnant air of a terminal breakdown. One witness remarked that Nick looked as though he were carrying the weight of a world only he could see. Consequently, these reports form a vital pillar of the disturbing details surrounding the case. They suggest that the Nick who walked into that Brentwood mansion days later was a shell, a biological vessel for a storm of untreated neurological static. The gas station wasn't just a stop for fuel, it was a stage where the internal collapse finally became external. But if the gas station was a quiet warning, the public explosion that followed was a public declaration of the coming end. If the Brentwood crime scene was the final act, the holiday party at Conan O'Brien's home was the dress rehearsal where the mask finally slipped. In the hyper-curated world of the A-list, a social gathering is a delicate architecture of status and decorum. But on December 13th, Nick Reiner brought a chaotic, entropic energy that threatened to dismantle the evening. Clad in a hoodie and jeans while a room full of legends like Jane Fonda and Bill Hader donned formal attire, Nick wasn't just underdressed, he was socially untethered. He reportedly drifted through the crowd like a predator or a ghost, interrupting private conversations with a chillingly repetitive script. What's your name? What's your last name? Are you famous? The evening reached a point of no return when Nick confronted former SNL star Bill Hader. When Hader politely signaled that the conversation was private, Nick didn't just leave, he froze, projecting a 1,000-yard stare that radiated a visceral threat. It was the gaze of a man whose internal reality had finally overridden the external world. This social friction culminated in a massive blow-up with his father. According to reports from the Daily Mail and TMZ, the argument between Rob and Nick became so explosive and loud that guests discussed calling 911 or placing Nick on an involuntary psychiatric hold. The paradox of the evening lies in the host's intervention. Conan O'Brien reportedly stepped in to de-escalate, allegedly stating, "It's my house, my party, I'm not calling the police." It was a moment of protective Hollywood omerta that in hindsight feels like a missed exit on a highway to hell. Rob Reiner, visibly mortified and petrified, allegedly confessed to friends that night, "I think my own son can hurt me." The family left the party abruptly, a hasty retreat from a public humiliation that would, within hours, transform into a private massacre. This wasn't just an argument, it was the final fracture of the father-son bond in the public eye. When the Reiners walked out of that Pacific Palisades estate, they weren't just heading home, they were walking into the center of a storm that had been brewing for 15 years. If the Brentwood mansion was the epicenter of the tragedy, the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica was its haunting fever dream aftermath. At approximately 4 a.m. on Sunday, just hours after the violent fracture at the O'Brien party and the silent slaughter that followed, Nick Reiner checked into a standard room using his own credit card. To the night staff, he was an anomaly, a man appearing tweaked out and profoundly agitated, yet possessing a chilling lack of visible trauma. There were no cuts on his hands, no spray of red on his hoodie. He was a mirage of normalcy in the middle of a psychic break. But the reality hidden behind the "Do Not Disturb" sign was far more visceral. When Nick abandoned the room without checking out later that morning, hotel staff discovered a scene that defied conventional forensic logic. The shower was reportedly full of blood, a crimson reservoir that suggested a desperate, ritualistic attempt to wash away the physical evidence of his parents' lifeblood. Stains marred the bedsheets, but the most disturbing detail was the architecture of the room itself. Nick had used the bedding to systematically cover the windows, cocooning himself in a dark, fabric-lined tomb to block out the morning sun. The paradox lies in the transition. Between the murders and his arrival at the hotel, Nick had seemingly found the presence of mind to navigate a transaction and secure a refuge, yet his subsequent actions in the room reflected a total psychological dissolution. Was this a moment of lucidity where he realized the magnitude of the overkill, or was the hotel room a systemic extension of his psychosis, a place where he could finally sit in the silence of his own making? Consequently, the Pierside Hotel became a secondary crime scene of immense symbolic weight. It represented the buffer zone between the act and the arrest, a transient space where the son of a Hollywood legend tried to scrub the Brentwood soil from his skin. It is at this precise moment that the investigation shifted from a search for a suspect to a deep dive into a man who was clearly unraveling in real time. But even the blood in that Santa Monica shower could not compare to the sheer technical brutality found back at the estate, a level of violence that forensic experts would eventually categorize as absolute overkill. In the quiet, elite corridors of Brentwood, the Brentwood mansion on Chadbourne Avenue became a site of profound forensic horror. When Romy Reiner walked into her parents' master bedroom on that Sunday afternoon, she didn't just find a crime scene, she found a systemic annihilation of the human form. Forensic expert Joseph Scott Morgan, analyzing the reports for the Law and Crime Network, noted that the scene was characterized by a specific, chilling phenomenon: absolute overkill. This isn't just a murder, it is a maniacal expenditure of energy that far exceeds what is necessary to end a life. The medical examiner's report, released on December 17, 2025, details a barrage of multiple sharp force injuries directed at both Rob and Michelle Reiner. To visualize this is to understand the geometry of a psychotic break. The term overkill in forensic science often points to a deeply personal or internally driven rage. In this case, the sheer volume of wounds, reportedly totaling dozens across both victims, suggests a killer who wasn't just ending lives, but was attempting to obliterate the source of his perceived torment. Rob Reiner at 78 and Michelle at 70 were found in their bedroom, a space transformed into a crimson splash room. The paradox lies in the weapon. A knife requires close proximity. It requires the killer to feel the resistance of the body and hear the finality of the act. For Nick Reiner to sustain this level of violence against two people, including his own father, whom he had argued with just hours prior, suggests a mind that had entirely detached from the fundamental empathy of the human condition. Investigators noted the maniacal nature of the attack, wounds that were not just fatal but repetitive and unnecessary, a signature of expressive violence that often accompanies untreated schizophrenia. Consequently, the physical evidence at the Brentwood estate tells a story the defense will struggle to mask. While Alan Jackson may argue a lack of mens rea due to Nick's mental state, the sheer architecture of the violence, the energy required to carry out a double overkill stabbing, paints a picture of a relentless, driving force. It was a massacre that lasted only minutes, but left a stain on the Reiner legacy that no amount of Hollywood history can wash away. However, as the blood dried, a new battle began, not over the events of that night, but over the staggering fortune that remained. In the cold, clinical world of California probate law, there is a principle of no profit that serves as the final barrier between a killer and a windfall. With Rob Reiner's estate valued at a staggering $200 million, the financial stakes of this tragedy are as immense as the human ones. This brings us to the Slayer's statute hegemony, specifically California Probate Code Section 250. This law is an uncompromising piece of legal architecture designed to ensure that no person can benefit from their own felonious and intentional wrongdoing. Under this statute, if Nick Reiner is convicted, the law treats him as if he had predeceased his parents. His share of the Reiner fortune, likely a life-changing $50 million or more, would evaporate, redirected to his surviving siblings, Tracy, Jake, and Romy. The paradox lies in the standard of proof. While a criminal conviction requires beyond a reasonable doubt, the Slayer statute can be triggered in civil court by a mere preponderance of the evidence. This means that even if Alan Jackson secures a not guilty verdict in criminal court, Nick could still be financially disinherited if a probate judge decides it is more likely than not that he intended to kill. However, the defense is already weaponizing the one exception that could shatter this iron law: insanity. If Nick is found not guilty by reason of insanity, or NGRI, the intentional element of the Slayer statute becomes a legal gray zone. In the eyes of the law, a mind lost to schizophrenia may lack the capacity for the intent required to bar an inheritance. Consequently, the battle for the Reiner legacy isn't just about prison time, it is a high-stakes chess match over a $200 million empire. It is at this precise moment that the tragedy takes on a cynical, systemic edge. The very wealth that Nick's parents spent a lifetime building is now the engine fueling his defense, as his legal team fights to prove he was too broken to understand the value of the lives he took, or the fortune he stood to gain. In the end, the story of the Reiner parricide is not just a chronicle of a crime, but a paradox of the American dream. We are left with a haunting silence where there was once a titan of culture. Rob Reiner's life was defined by his ability to articulate the human condition, to find the warmth in a friendship, the humor in a struggle, and the justice in a legal battle. But his final act was one he could neither script nor direct. It was a visceral, chaotic dissolution of the very family unit he spent decades portraying as the ultimate sanctuary. The hidden reality we must confront is that no amount of wealth, celebrity, or progressive idealism can provide an absolute shield against the systemic collapse of the mind. The Brentwood estate, once a hub of intellectual and creative power, has been reduced to a forensic archive. We see a father who was petrified of the legacy he helped create, and a son who has become a living testament to the failure of the modern mental health and addiction infrastructure. Even with every resource available, the Reiners were trapped in a mirage of safety until the very moment the door was kicked in by a reality they could no longer manage. Consequently, the legal proceedings ahead will be a cold, clinical autopsy of a family's soul. As Alan Jackson prepares to argue the mechanics of a shattered brain and the state of California weighs the intentionality of a psychotic break, the public is left to grapple with the terrifying truth. If a dynasty this powerful, this enlightened, and this resourceful could not stop a 15-year terminal descent, what does that say about the architecture of our collective safety nets? We are left with the image of a darkened Brentwood mansion and a $200 million fortune sitting in a legal limbo, a testament to a life ended not with a cinematic fade to black, but with a sudden, jagged cut. The Reiner legacy, once a beacon of Hollywood's golden heart, now stands as a monument to a much darker, more fundamental human fragility. The tragedy invites one final haunting synthesis. When the lights go out on a dynasty, do we remember the stories they told us or the one they couldn't escape?